Over the Years and Roads, a virtual tour of the colonies in Mexico. It has been my opportunity over the years to accompany many groups and individuals who have traveled miles to visit what are known as the Mormon colonies in northern Mexico. This is the place their ancestors called home. I have seen and felt their excitement as the family histories that they have read for years suddenly come to life around each bend of the road. Relatively few of the hundreds, if not thousands, of descendants of these stalwart pioneers will be able to visit these sites in person. It is my hope to be able to share this experience with as many as possible by providing a virtual tour that will make names of places more meaningful by means of pictures, a few facts, and some historic folklore along the way that might be a little entertaining, even though maybe not always that factual. This is not intended to cover the history of the different settlements, since many books have been written over the years that attempt to do this. These books are based on family journals. Although these are precious, invaluable historical treasures, they do contain many discrepancies and a few downright fantasies. Since the definitions of the good old days is a faulty memory and a vivid imagination, it is therefore doubtful that everyone's ancestor had personal and intimate interactions with Pancho Villa. I will therefore attempt to refrain from adding my version of history to those that have already been written. So just hang on as we take a ride over some bumpy roads south of the border. Most of the early colonizers crossed the United States-Mexico border at Columbus, New Mexico, whose claim to fame came later in 1916 by another crossing of the border by the notorious Pancho Villa when he and his band raided the town. This incident resulted in the U.S. government sending Blackjack Pershing with a small army in pursuit of the famed outlaw. This punitive expedition served as an excellent field exercise in preparation for World War I, which was on the horizon. The Army's base camp was located just on the outskirts of Colonia Dublan. The Mexico Customs headquarters at that time was located about 50 miles south of the border at what is now La Asunción. This was also the first campsite and later settlement for the early colonists. This was set up just 2 miles west of town on the banks of the Casas Grandes River. Colonia Diaz. Today, little is left of what was Colonia Diaz, named after Porfirio Diaz, the president dictator of Mexico for nearly 30 years. Most of the colonies were named after prominent historical or political figures to demonstrate loyalty to their newly adopted country. Diaz welcomed many foreign settlers that he hoped would bring progress to the country. He was right. The first contribution made by these pioneers wherever they settled was to introduce irrigation systems to the region. They could not successfully raise crops on the high Chihuahuan Desert Plateau, depending solely on the meager rainfall. They diverted water from the Casas Grandes River into ditches to water their fields. Even today, some of these cotton tree-lined ditches are used. These and a few foundations of large brick homes along the main street, plus what remains of the cemetery, are the only reminders of the earliest and once vibrant settlement, which was destroyed by a fire during the Revolution after its occupants had fled in 1912. It was never resettled. Colonia Dublan. The next colony down the road about 80 miles is Colonia Dublan. To reach it, one passes through Janos, the oldest Spanish settlement in the area that dates back to the 1600s. Dublan is the largest colony and it can be recognized by the wide streets lined with trees and irrigation ditches that still carry water from the Dublin Canal and lakes, a system that was set up over 100 years ago. Many of the large two-storied brick homes remain, as well as many beautiful large modern homes belonging to descendants of the founders and wealthy families from the city of Nuevo Casas Grandes, which formed the southern boundary of town. This modern city was born with the arrival of the railroad connecting to Ciudad Juarez across the Rio Grande from El Paso. Since Dublin was established nearly 10 years before Nuevo Casas Grandes, it served as a pattern for the layout of Nuevo Casas Grandes. They continued the wide straight streets, and thus it is probably the best laid out town in Mexico. Since it began with only the train station, many of the old timers in Dublin still say, "I'm running up to the station to do some shopping." Colonia Juarez. About 20 miles southwest of Dublin is Colonia Juarez. En route, one passes what we call Old Town, or the original Casas Grandes, meaning big homes. This area takes its name from the multi-storied dwellings that the early Spanish explorers discovered at the Paquime ruins. Colonia Juarez is nestled in a narrow valley of the Piedras Verdes River. The apple and peach orchards extend up and down the valley for nearly half a dozen miles, as well as on surrounding hillsides. These orchards continue to comprise the mainstay of the economy. This central colony is the home of Academia Juarez, formerly the Juarez Stake Academy, or JSA, that many of your ancestors attended. It is also where the Colonia Juarez Temple, which was dedicated in 1999, is located. The road to the mountain colonies. Approximately a mile southwest of the Academy, as you leave the Colonia Juarez Purchase, the valley opens up into a small ejido community of Cuauhtemoc. This was the first site that was settled in December of 1885, and later the colonists had to move where the present town site is located. The San Diego Hacienda, belonging to Don Luis Terrazas, is another 2 miles down the valley, where the Piedras Verdes and San Miguel or Palanganas rivers join to form the Casas Grandes River. About 5 miles beyond is the village of Mata Ortiz, which today is known for its world-famous pottery. It was known as Pearson to your ancestors, since Frederick Stark Pearson established a large lumber mill there. This was where the women and children from Garcia, Pacheco, and Colonia Juarez boarded the train for El Paso in July of 1912 because of the revolution. This event is referred to as the Exodus. Continuing in a little more westerly direction, the now paved road begins the long climb up the eastern slope of the Sierra Madre, following the old railroad grade, which was another project initiated by Pearson, but never finished because of the revolution. We must pause and rest from our long, steep climb for a couple of true stories that literally have their endings around the next 2 bends of the road. A baby boy, only a few days old, was lying in the back of a covered wagon with his mother while they were crossing the plains. At one of the many fords of the Platte River, the wagon tipped over and both were carried away by the rushing current. The mother was rescued almost immediately, but the infant took longer to be located. Unsure of his survival, he was given a name and a blessing. The name was Alma Platt Spilsbury. He did survive the dunking of his namesake river, but around 60 years later, He was again in a wagon, this time hauling a load of wool from Colonia Garcia to Colonia Juarez, when he got too close to the edge of the road and he plummeted to his death. Joseph Henry James, or Joe James, has to be one of the most colorful characters of the early colonists. He was a homespun philosopher, humorist, and inventor. His last invention was a log chute to get logs from the top of the mountain to the valley below without having to haul them down the steep, rocky, and dangerous San Diego Canyon Road. He and one of his workers, along with many others, stood near the bottom of the chute to witness the first log that was launched from the top by one of his sons. The log jumped the chute and killed both Joe and his worker. We will continue on up the mountain, making sure that we don't get too close to the edge and keeping an eye open for stray logs. This formation is called the Oregon Cliffs. We see below us the dreaded San Diego Canyon Road, mentioned in the biographies of most of the mountain colonists. Following the Exodus, the Canyon Road was abandoned in favor of the railroad grade, which is still followed to the Summit Pass, which reaches an elevation of 7,600 feet. About 3 miles beyond the summit, the original dirt road begins a long descent into what is called Big Park, as opposed to Little Park, which is over the next hill. There exists another location called Luntz Park. What is all this park business about? Well, as near as I can figure, since many of the early settlers came from the British Isles, and they were used of calling a pretty grassy spot a park. Big Park was a favorite overnight camping spot for the loaded freight wagons traveling from Garcia or Pacheco to Colonia Juarez. Here, the driver and his team of horses or mules could get a night's rest and be fresh in the morning for the long pull up to the summit. Empty wagons and buggies could make the total trip in one long day if all went well, which sometimes it did. Next, we come to Honeymoon Cave, which, according to folklore, a newlywed couple from one of the colonies was caught in a snowstorm and had to spend 2 or 3 days, or should I say nights, there. It could have been one of your ancestors. We have now entered Arch Flat, as you will be able to see. In addition to all of the nice sandstone formations, there are ancient cave dwellings where you may find where an ancestor etched his name on a wall. A well-known teacher some of you may have had at the academy used to say, "Fools' names and fools' faces are often found in public places." It is rumored that his name may be found there. Next, the little stream that we have been following joins what is called Soldier Canyon, and we have reached Strawberry, named either for the unusual rock formations or for wild strawberries. Take your pick. Here, Alma Platt Spilsbury had his homestead until a huge flood coming out of Soldier Canyon destroyed the fruits of his labor, forcing him to relocate elsewhere. This was a common theme with many of these stalwart pioneers. As we climb out of Strawberry Valley, we can see ruts that our forebears' steel-rimmed wagon wheels cut into solid rock, and we think the road we are on is rough. Stop and think about it for a while. Most of them crossed the ocean, which at that time was a voyage of several weeks and hardly a pleasure cruise. They walked across the plains to Salt Lake. They helped settle much of southern Utah. They crossed the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry and established settlements in northern Arizona and later along the Gila River. And then they entered another foreign land. None of these places were necessarily flowing with milk and honey when they arrived. Well, let's keep moving or we are not going to arrive at the fork in the road. It has been said that when you come to a fork, take it. We will take the right one that will lead us to Pacheco. The left one leads to Garcia and then on to Chuchupa. We will take that one road later. Just before reaching Pacheco, we pass Poverty Flat, so named by Joe James, who claimed that on a good year he could harvest enough corn to feed his horse to plow the ground again the next year. I was passing the area many years later when we saw a brother we knew disking the ground on a small tractor. The brother I was riding with stopped his truck and greeted him. "Oh, brother, what are you doing?" He answered, "Well, I'm a-fixin' to plant this here sack of beans." To which my companion responded, "If I were you, I would cook them up and eat them while you've got them." Colonia Pacheco. Colonia Pacheco is located in the Corrales Basin, so named because of some old rock corrals found there, which were apparently built by some early indigenous tribes. The beautiful town site sits just under the Continental Divide to the west and slightly above the Piedras Verdes River to the east. It was established in 1890, making it the first official mountain colony. Like the other towns, it was laid out with 5-acre blocks, wide streets lined with irrigation ditches and trees. All of the Mexican colonies cannot be identified by two varieties of trees that were introduced to the area, locust and poplars. Only about 24 local families remained in town until the paved road reached it a few years ago, causing the population to slightly increase. What used to nearly be half a day drive can now easily be done in an hour. I hope someday to be able to see the video replay of these abandoned communities, what they looked like in their prime, with their nice, well-kept homes, gardens, and outbuildings. I'm sure they would have rivaled any town of their size. Until then, we can only picture the scene in our minds. We do have pictures of the old ward building that served as the school, community center, etc., which was erected following the Exodus. Just south of town, on a ledge above the river, is a monument marking what is known as Temple Hill. The following plaques explain its significance. The cemetery is located just north of town before reaching the suburb of Stevens, named after one of the families that had their homestead there. I never cease to be amazed to see graves of some born in England resting under pine trees here in such an isolated spot. What a journey they had. Another 5 miles north of the small settlement is the small settlement of Cave Valley, or Quebale to the locals, near the Cueva de la Olla archaeological site. It was never an official church-recognized colony, but at one time there were several families living there, and there was a small dependent branch there. The paved road ends just 2 miles beyond at the town of Willie, which is a name that the locals derived from Williams Ranch. Another 2 miles downriver was the Cliff Ranch, where the Thompson family was attacked by renegade Apaches. They periodically broke off from the reservation in Arizona and roamed the mountains up until the 1930s, causing church leaders to advise members to remain on the main settlements and not on isolated ranches. Well, we will now go back to take that left-hand fork of the road that we passed a while back. After about 3 miles, it drops into a beautiful valley just upstream from Corrales. This is called Hop Valley, supposedly because of wild hops that grew there. It is here that Joe James lived with his 3 wives and over 24 children. 2 streams converge here, forming a Y. Being the practical man that he was, he built a home for each of his wives in each of the three forks, claiming that notwithstanding flooding streams, he would always have a roof over his head. After climbing out of Hop Valley and crossing Mesa de los Charcos, or Mud Puddle Flat, the road drops into a beautiful little canyon where it crosses the creek 9 times as you drive upstream to our next mountain colony, Colonia Garcia. On the edge of a nearly perfectly round valley situated less than a mile from the Continental Divide is Colonia Garcia, which naturally has been referred to at times as Round Valley. The residents of each of the 3 mountain colonies justifiably argue about which has the most beautiful setting. I don't dare offer my opinion, but I will avow with all confidence that Garcia has to be in the top 3. As the proverbial crow flies, since he is said to follow a more direct flight path than his feathered cousins, Garcia is about 5 miles southeast of Pacheco. Because of its elevation, it may be the coldest colony, having experienced frosts in every month of the year but July, due to rare late frosts up into the early part of June and early frosts at the end of August. With such a short growing season, crops were very limited here and in the other mountain colonies. They depended mostly on lumber and cattle for income. Besides harvesting wildlife for their own support, they provided guided hunting tours for deer, turkey, bear, lion, and wolves, all of which abounded in the Sierra at that time. I must now pause again for a story that has become legendary in colony folklore, the infamous Garcia horse race. There are many versions, so I will try to condense it to a few facts that most may agree on, while mentioning no names to protect the innocent. Garcia planned and hosted the other colonists to about a 3-day grand 24th of July celebration, with rodeos, dances, dramas, etc., not to mention plenty of popular food for sale: pit barbecue, sloppy joes, baked beans, popcorn, lemonade, etc. The concession sales, which proceeds were undoubtedly for a worthy cause, were under the direction of the local Sunday school organization. The entire hoopla was to culminate with a race between the prize small, gray dappled mountain horse against a larger Palomino flatland steed. Not only was the pride of the 2 geographical groups of the colonists at stake, but many local citizens from surrounding sawmill villages flocked for the excitement, and as was the custom, wagers were made on the sly. The entire main street of town where the event took place was lined with assorted, eager spectators. The official starter, undoubtedly the highest ranking civil authority present, dropped his hat and they were off. Near the finish line, when it became apparent that the mountain horse was not to be the winner, many, including maybe some of your ancestors, swear to have been standing next to the Sunday school superintendent, who also swore as he slapped his pant leg with his hat and said, "Dang, there goes the Sunday school money." To this day, when many of those from the colonies wish to express their frustration or disappointment, they say, "There goes the Sunday school money," and we all know what they mean. Colonia Chuechupa. If you continue south down the racetrack, the road leaves the open valley and enters a lush pine forest, and you are on your way to the southernmost and final mountain colony, Chuechupa, or Chupi for short. The name means Valley of the Mists. It lies in a high and large mountain valley astride the continental divide of the Sierra Madre Occidental, about 40 miles south of Colonia Garcia. En route, you pass through Meadow Valley, where the Piedras Verdes River is born, which flows through Hop Valley, Pacheco, Cay Valley, and Colonia Juarez. The Chupi Valley is very large and fertile, but again crops are limited because of the short growing season due to the high elevation. Like the other mountain colonists, they had to subsist on what they could produce in their gardens, their domestic animals, and the abundant game in the forests. Chupi had the additional advantage of the nearby Black Canyon, whose small, pure, cold water tributaries teemed with native trout. Many pleasure-filled hours have been spent over the years with a good excuse to go fishing. We have now concluded a brief trip over some bumpy roads to the colonies found in the state of Chihuahua. 2 additional colonies were established over the Sierra to the west in the neighboring state of Sonora along the Bavispe River, Colonia Oaxaca and Colonia Morelos. The former was destroyed by a flood in 1905. The latter still has some of the old original rig structures remaining. Unfortunately, due to the distance and road conditions that make them nearly inaccessible, we will not be able to visit them on this trip. Maybe mañana. We have traveled together over the years and roads with our ancestors in search of our roots in Mexico. I hope that this shared journey has not only increased our appreciation for their hard work and sacrifice, but that we have felt and will continue to feel of their presence and influence.
México lindo y querido, si muero lejos de ti, que digan que estoy dormido y que me traigan a ti, que digan que estoy dormido y que me traigan a ti, México lindo y querido, si muero lejos